Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
Experiencer touched, probe during 2 separate alien incidents at home. This is an event that happened many years ago. For a long time, I couldn't even think about it, much less discuss it with anyone. As the years have gone by, it's gotten easier to do so, and I've decided to share it with you. Make of it what you will. I had moved back home in Pfafftown, North Carolina to take care of my mother after my father died in 1991. My mother died in December of 1999, so this incident happened during this time frame. I can narrow it down a little more. A specific job I had until 1996, I know it happened during this time, because of the guy I was dating while I worked there. I'm afraid I can't be any more specific than this. He had been over to the house that evening to hang out. I lived in the basement of my parents' house. We watched TV and little else. He left around midnight, and I worked on going to bed. The next thing I remember, I was laying in bed, on my right side. I had my right arm under my head, stretched out. My left arm was kind of slung behind my back. The room was dark. I was just trying to drift off to sleep, but was still fully conscious of my surroundings. The next thing I remember was hearing a very soft shuffling of lots of little footsteps, carpet, coming into the room and surrounding my bed. I opened my eyes to see a typical gray alien standing right in front of my bed, about 3 feet away from me. Behind him, in the shadows, I could make out several smaller ones, kind of like children, surrounding my bed. The bigger one was a rubbery gray, but unlike pics that I've seen. It was wearing this gray puffy, quilted vest that crossed over his shoulders, like an X over his chest. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the best I can describe it. I tried to move, but realized I was unable to do so. I kept trying to pull my left arm from behind my back, but it was completely frozen in place. The only thing I could move was my eyes. I realized this was really happening. The time on my bedside clock was 6 minutes after 1. I'll never forget that. I finally managed to talk a little, and for some reason, it seemed important at the time to make sure the alien knew that I could see him, that it had been caught. I kept croaking out the words, "No, not tonight," over and over. It's the only thing I could say. After a minute, it reached out and touched my arm with either a long thin wand or its finger. I don't know which, but there was a small light on the end of it. When it touched my arm, they were all gone, and I could move again. It was over. I remember just laying there, trying to remember to breathe, looking at the clock by my bed. I did tell my mom about it the next morning. She didn't remember anything strange from the night before. I had a second encounter several months later. This one is extremely difficult to write about, but I figure, if I'm going to share, I might as well share all. Again, I was laying in my bed, this time more on my stomach, when I felt something climb up on the bed with me. Again, when I tried to move, I found I was paralyzed. I then felt something being inserted into my rear end, and then into my vagina. It generated a pulse, which after a couple minutes, brought me to an orgasm. After that, I felt it being removed, something slowly climb off my bed, and then I could move again, and it was over. I was never able to see anything. What's even more crazy is I again looked at the time. It was 6 minutes after 1, same as before. The next morning, my mother asked me if I had another visit from my little friends. She had gotten up around 1 a.m. to use the bathroom, and saw some strange lights outside the bathroom window, down in the woods behind the house. In my heart I know these events were very real. I have no idea what was going on, or what they were doing. I've never had any other encounters, that I'm aware of. I've thought over the years about possibly going through hypnosis to find out. But I think I don't really want to know. And see.
Verifying Scaly Gray being encounter. I feel that people tend to criticize other stories like these and make that person feel like they're insane. Regardless of that, here's my story. On the night of May 18, 2016, I was playing a popular online console game called Call of Duty Black Ops 3. I am an avid gamer and tend to lose time when playing this game. During the wait between matches, I would watch random YouTube videos that popped up in the recommended section on the side of the screen. I'm sure many of you have had this happen to you, but somehow I ended up in the section about space, time travel and aliens. Some of the videos questioned the origins of humanity, if UFOs were real, and the different types of aliens that have visited Earth. After spending a few hours on the game and watching these videos, I looked at one of my monitor screens to check the time and had noticed it was past midnight, somewhere around 1 a.m, I don't remember specifically. I decided it was pretty late and needed to get some sleep. So, I turned off the console and hopped in bed. For some reason I could not get comfortable lying in bed normally, so I pretty much slept upside down, meaning feet to the headboard, head to the foot of the bed. I know, strange, but it worked and I fell asleep. Now this next part is important to the scenery of the room. If I could draw a picture and upload it I would, but I don't believe that to be an option on this specific site. I have a pretty nerdy gaming setup. I've always been into video games since I was a kid, and friends of mine today say that I am an undercover nerd because of all the electronics I have. My setup consists of 3 monitors, a custom-built PC, all the bells and whistles for live streaming videos, games, etc. Most nights I don't turn my monitors off because when the computer goes into sleep mode the monitors just go black. You may be asking why I'm even typing all this out, but trust me, it becomes relevant to the rest of the event, which I'll get into now. So here I am starting to get really tired and my eyes begin to close. I don't remember going to sleep, but I do remember waking up. I woke up to the strangest feeling. I thought I was having a nightmare and remembered that if you know you're dreaming then you're not dreaming anymore. I was awake, very awake, and I could not move my body. My head was faced towards my nerdy gaming setup and all 3 of my monitors were doing that hazy, statusy, white and gray projection that everyone's seen in scary movies. The weird part is that they have never done that before, ever. The light emitted from the monitors was so bright that I did not notice what was standing next to me at first. I have a king-size bed on a frame that puts the mattress pretty high. This thing was at about eye level with me, so it had to have been about 4 feet tall. Like I said, I could not move my body at all during this entire time. I could however move my eyes. I tried my hardest to turn my head, make a noise, scream, but nothing would come out. I was paralyzed looking at this thing that got even more terrifying by the second. I started panicking and began convulsing violently because I didn't know what was happening. I could see this thing looking right into my eyes with its huge dark glossy black ovals as eyes and skin that seemed almost lizard and really dark gray color. Eventually I just blacked out after staring at this thing for a few very long seconds. I've never had a seizure, I've seen someone have them multiple times, but I have never had one myself. That is the only word I can think of that relates to what happened to my body after I began panicking. But if you have a seizure, you don't know you're having a seizure. So, what happened? After blacking out I came to, still laying backwards in my bed. All the lights were off in the room, the monitors were pitch black, and it almost seemed like everything was back to normal. I just laid there for probably 10 to 15 minutes, petrified as to what I just experienced. After slowly getting the courage to get out of bed and tactically check my apartment for intruders, I sat down at my computer and looked at the time. I don't recall the exact time I got into bed, but I do recall the time difference from when I got into bed and when I had gotten up out of bed after the whole experience. The difference in time was only 30 minutes. So, within 30 minutes all of this happened. It wasn't a dream. It was as real as I've ever seen anything in my life. I made an attempt at drawing what I had seen before my eyes, which is attached to this post. I told this story to my mother, and surprisingly she believed me. Just so you know, I am 23, a combat veteran, and shit doesn't scare me very often. This is my attempt at letting you all know that I have been in pretty stressful situations and not turned into a pussy like I did on this night. To be honest, I quite enjoy scary movies, I find them kind of funny. But this thing was absolutely terrifying, and not being able to control my body while this happened made it even more traumatic. I wanted to type this up to get the word out because I know some people have had other experiences like this but are confused and frightened like I was and am. If something similar has happened to you, know that you're not alone out there. I was a skeptic about this type of thing beforehand, and I believe that is the smartest way to go about life until you are certain something is real with personal experience. There are a lot of videos and stories on the internet that are extremely fake, so definitely question everything you see if you're skeptical as well. However, after this night I am full-heartedly a believer. Aliens are real, and they are terrifying. P4.
Uniformed alien confronts witness near Land O'Lakes State Forest, Minnesota. I was attending our family reunion at my uncle's cabin near Land O'Lakes State Forest, Minnesota during the first week of July 1986. There were about 25 family members present, including my aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was the first night at the cabin, and all the children were set up in tents outside. That night, my 2 older brothers, my cousin and I shared a 4-person tent about 150 feet away from the cabin. Since it was so long ago, I've just recently become more fearful of it. We were all sleeping. I guess it was around 2 a.m. I was sleeping on the far side of the tent, and for some reason I woke up in the middle of the night. I was lying flat on my back, and I found myself looking directly into the eyes of something. It was standing on my left near my head, and appeared to be studying me before I woke. The image of its face, that I can still picture vividly in my head, is similar to others' drawings that I've seen later in my adult life. Somewhat normal-sized head, though large for its body. It couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. gray-green wrinkly face. Very small nostril holes. The nose was almost flush with its face. The eyes. The frightening part about its eyes was the way that it was looking at me. Or maybe I misunderstood its reaction to my terror. It was wearing a collared uniform of sorts. Similar to a trench coat that came down to the ground with seams on the front. I believed that this being was important. It was dark fuchsia purple in color and appeared to be a dull suede texture. The moonlight made his face and coat sort of glow. The suit had a tall collar. I got the impression that this was a possible leader or overseer. This all happened in a few seconds. I remember being terrified and immediately trying to scream, but nothing happened. My brothers didn't wake. I just remember the very serious look that came over its face, as if I did scream. His head tilted back like he was scorning me, or that it was somehow disappointed. The next portion of my memory picks up shortly after. I remember being very cold, wet, and beginning to wake again. This time I am on the ground in the weeds about 15 feet from the tent. It took all of 5 seconds after waking on the ground before I remembered the face that I just saw looking down at me from inside the tent, and I let out a terrifying scream. I remember I screamed so violently that I woke my aunt, who was sleeping in the cabin over 150 feet away. I saw her silhouette after she quickly flipped on the lights to investigate. I ran to the tent and my brother was still scrambling to unzip the door. I remember the sound of the zipper when finally opening it, and he reached his arms out and pulled me in. He was asking me what was wrong. I was scared and confused. He had me lie back down. As I lied there, I told him what I had seen in the tent with us. He told me to just go back to sleep. I never told him that I also just woke up outside. That wasn't supposed to be the important part. The next morning there were about 10 other people who were talking and asking around if they knew who it was that was screaming at 3:30 in the morning. No one would say. My aunt chimed in and said she heard it too, and how she had quickly looked out the window and couldn't see who it was. This also frightened me because I thought it was apparent to everyone. I went and found my mom and whispered to her that it was me, that I screamed last night. She appeared worried and asked why. I saw an alien. I remember the nervous pause before she whispered back. Don't say that to anyone, okay? I believed that there was an hour or more of lost time between the encounter in the tent and realizing that I was outside the tent and screaming. How did I end up outside the tent? How did I get wet? Was I abducted? I've never been able to answer this. K.
Why did this happen to me? In the spring of 1967, my mother and I were living in a third-floor apartment in Cleveland. The apartment was on the backside of the building with an alley below. There were fraternity houses at Cleveland State across the alley. Around 9 p.m., my mother is washing the dishes, and as I walk from the kitchen into the living room I pass the large window on the right. I wasn't looking at the window, but as I walked by something caught my eye. I turned and faced the window. There's a big huge round yellowish white light or orb just hovering out there, probably 30 to 40 feet beyond, between our building and the frat houses right above the alley. The first few seconds that I looked at it my mind is racing, trying to figure out what it is. I was 12 years old and had never seen anything like that. After looking at it for a couple more seconds a strange feeling came over me. It's hard to explain, but I could feel that this thing was alive and it was looking back at me. As that thought registered in my brain, it quickly flied straight towards the window and towards me. It abruptly stopped and hovered a few feet from the window. Suddenly I had a warm sensation at my feet, like it was scanning me. The warm feeling traveled up my legs, slowly through my waist, chest and shoulders. When it reached my head, I felt a sharp pain, like the thing was now inside my head, and I was in there with it. For a matter of seconds, I felt like my life was being examined by this entity. I sensed images, like they were a part of a movie of my life. I felt that it was in a hurry to do this, and that it was excited and enjoying it. Then immediately it came out of me, and I collapsed to the floor. I could still mentally communicate with it, and asked it to just leave, and that I wasn't a threat. It hovered above me for a few seconds, then quickly moved through the window. I completely lost sight and communication with it. I could hardly move, but managed to get on my feet, and slowly walk towards the kitchen. I called for my mother, but she didn't acknowledge me, and continued washing dishes. I tried to call out to her again, but then realized I wasn't hearing anything coming from my mouth. I reached and grabbed her by the arm. She was alarmed, and we quickly moved into the living room. I sat there for almost 10 minutes, unable to speak, while looking at my terrified mother. Eventually, my voice returned, and I told her what had happened. She later called the Air Force. The man on the phone told her that I probably saw a car headlight and misinterpreted the event. She argued, but he eventually hung up the telephone on her. I've had to deal with this for almost 50 years. I still don't know why it happened to me. I was a child and didn't know how to handle it. I didn't understand why it happened to me. It has affected my life and I believe I have been monitored by it, or something else during that period of time since the event. I have trouble interacting with people, though I was fortunate to marry a man who helps me to get through the uncertainty I experience each day. We never had children, which was by design. I just couldn't expose them to what I have become. I don't know if I have ever been confronted by these entities since that day, but I always have a lingering sense that they will eventually show themselves. MM.
Alien craft, entity communication near Dillon, South Carolina. On Friday, April 4, 1969, just a few days before Easter, my friend and I were setting out on a hitchhiking expedition from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Two soldiers with vague hopes of scoring with some partying college co-eds, taking their spring break in the popular seaside town. Leaving the base with our backpacks and sleeping bags at about sunset, we headed south out of Fayetteville on Interstate 95. Reaching the large rest stop, south of the border, a few hours later, we stopped at a coffee shop to grab a cup and get our bearings before continuing on. SOP, as the soldiers called it, was located just across the border in South Carolina outside the town of Dillon. While drinking our coffees and looking over our map, we couldn't help but notice a rather loud group of local rowdies, talking loudly and throwing dirty looks our way. This was the way it was during the 1960s. In the area of the South we were in, it could be dangerous for hitchhiking strangers, especially blacks, hippies, Yankees and soldiers. Accordingly, we took the leering snarls very seriously, finishing up quickly and moving on down the road. Soon, we were walking through downtown Dillon toward Route 25, the old ladder highway cut off toward Myrtle Beach, still 70 miles away. One good ride would get us there and at the same time get us away from the trouble we both sense. And sure enough, it wasn't all that long before two cars showed up with our friends from the coffee shop on board, hooting and hollering as they went by. As empty as the town was at this time of night, nearly 10 p.m., it didn't bother us too much because of the streetlights and the occasional traffic on the road. But, as we reached the edge of town near the cutoff, with the rowdies going by every few minutes and the chances of a ride looking increasingly doubtful, the two of us began looking for an escape hatch. After the loudmouths passed by us again and drove out of sight, we took the opportunity to slip off the road into a dimly lit area behind a vacant, broken-down gas station. Walking by the left side of the deserted building, we followed a wheel-rutted dirt path up and over a small crest, by now barely able to see more than a few feet in front of us, as we passed by trees on the edge of the gas station lot into almost complete darkness. But, as the two of us picked our way carefully down the car path, the whole area suddenly lit up in an aqua-green glow, showing a small field no more than a few acres in size. Now I could see clearly, and what I saw amazed me. There was a 3 or 4 story high, multi-deck UFO standing on what seemed to be metal legs. In addition, there were beings similar to humans, a head with 2 eyes, 2 arms and upright on 2 legs. They were colored green, either an effect of the ambient light or the result of my extreme confusion and fear. They were walking in the field and on decks which curved around the ship, with the nearest one about 20 feet away. He, she, it turned our way and said firmly, I believe telepathically, leave. Now. In spite of the danger that had caused us leave the highway in the first place, we both, like the trained soldiers we were, executed a smart about face and marched right back toward trouble. We hiked at a pretty quick route step down the road a few miles, without saying a word to, or looking at, each other, huffing just as fast as we could out of Dillon into some farming and pasturage area. Presently, the rowdies showed up once more in their cars, making it clear we were their targets for this night. Once again, as the cars went out of sight we left the highway, into a cow pasture this time. From a spot a few hundred yards off the road we watched them as they returned looking for us. Eventually, the night settled down, the cars were gone, and we climbed into our sleeping bags. The next morning we continued on to Myrtle Beach. Here's the best part. As far as I can recall we had forgotten about the UFO. One day, 30 years later my buddy called up from out of the blue and asked me, do you remember Dillon? I had no idea what he was talking about. But as soon as he said, the UFO, the whole experience came back in a flash.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.